during our committee last year, the AFCO, is that right? AFCO was meeting, and this was a much more positive group from what I understand. And we can't deal with any of that issue, but one of the issues, it's our issue in the sense as citizens. What we have is AFCO was given, since I have Ellen from the school, that was put into the school board. It's correlated with the schools and capacity. But there's not 100% correlation, which is what Jeff will help explain to us, because what we look at is where the new seats coming from, and most of them are not, the majority of them aren't coming from new homes. Yet that's, so what they're looking at in terms of controlling growth, we all know, those of us who've been here, and Larry has told us, we have very little land to develop. If we wanted to be crazy about development, we couldn't be. We just have limited resources to do it. So we have to be smart about development. But there's, in terms of revenue sources and all, from a standpoint of where it's coming from, it's going to impact us, and this is a political year, so I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to impact us if we slow down growth dramatically. And the people that want that have good reasons. I understand what they want it for. Because the feel, I used to say at Howard Community College, it's not about feeling good, it's about being good. And sometimes we want to feel good, and we think that this will solve problems. But I usually, when I used to work for with the college and would sit in front of the county council, I would talk about unintended consequences. And I think sometimes citizens themselves need to be more educated on unintended consequences of what they wish for. Because if our revenue is stressed because of, once you start pulling back on appropriate, which I think this county has done pretty well over Republicans and Democrats, development, you're going to impact revenue sources, and that will lead to a real financial issue of tax increases. And I'm just, my perspective on that, if you look at the demographics and an aging population, when you start doing that, you're playing with fire.
Seems very...
Well, what happened last time, put a reference, and those who know, they didn't do the transfer, the realtors came out, probably down in Annapolis, because Jim Roby, God bless him, lost control of this, and maybe he could have done a better job with the delegates, but the realtors came out, and so instead of raising the transfer tax, which was, we know now as we look, there's a correlation in terms of new students coming in. What they did, they went back and they increased the excise tax, is that correct? On new homes.
I mean,
which was ridiculous. There wasn't a correlation to it.
that's what, I mean, again, we're all...
You have a growing aging population. It may not be all like Ed Waddell or myself and the Reverend say, we're going to do what's right and we're going to invest in education. They're going to invest in their country, and it's going to be an issue for us. And we've got to figure out, I think in a sense, and it'll be up to the community, but whether we can find a way to communicate in a way that is fair and open, that people need to think about what they want and what they'll get for what they want in things. And whether that comes in the report or not, we need to at least think about it, because it's going to impact future budgets in the county. And if it impacts future budget, it impacts services that we provide the citizens in an already squeezed environment. So, it's a difficult thing. When I met last year, we met for Howard County concerned citizens, and I did that, and and with Stu Cohn, good people. They all, there's everybody who wants something. They're all good people. It isn't about self-serve, but what I said to anybody you think they've read the report, and I made them send the report out before I spoke with them. But people have, everyone who has a vested interest builds their case from that vested interest. And what we somehow have to get across is anybody doing something in the county, we got to start with broader data, not just your data. Because we can all make our data sing the way we want it. We need the broader data, and somehow we need to be able to articulate that and continue to do what we did last year. So that, I see that we got lots of challenges. At the end of the day, we're going to look at the numbers, and the numbers are going to tell us what we can do. But how we articulate and communicate to the county, again, to continue in doing better than we have in the past 3 years of getting discussions going and people talking about a broader perspective when they look at revenue, when they look at expenses, when they look at services, and what we really want in the county. Would be a good challenge for us to tackle. I don't think, as we finish this year again, I think there are not going to be a lot of people who will like what we say, perhaps, because of the fact that it's a 4-year time frame, but that won't change how I think we approach things. And
I think we're growing out all that. I think everybody's been growing, so I don't think anybody's slowing any of it. But I guess the question is, are we growing at a pace on the commercial side to keep up with our residential demands? And that's, I guess, the bigger question.
And the other thing I said, when we looked at every tax against the other counties.
Did you look at impact fees as far as residential?
I'm sure.
Or especially high density residential?
Was it the impact excise? Yep. And ours is per square foot. You'd have to relate them. But we looked at overall, our tax burden, Greg, we were pushing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not something we're trying to advertise.
I've said that for years.
But our tax burden on citizens is
Yep.
relatively high compared to our peers.
I've looked at the data, and
I mean, we
couldn't
can't
agree-
increase
couldn't agree
income
more.
tax because we're pushed there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Property tax
We're already
is
at-
right up there with others. So when we actually looked at recommending the transfer tax, we looked at that from a standpoint of, one, we thought there was a real correlation, though we didn't say specifically the school in this case, but we thought there was a real correlation to resales and increased number of students in the schools, more so than new houses. So we looked at that, and we looked at that where we compared to other counties, and we thought that we were comfortable with making that recommendation. Again, that was one that we didn't do last year, that we didn't have a consensus. And I should add that on everything that we recommended, every recommendation was unanimous. So that's exclusive of someone who wasn't there, but it was unanimous in terms of the
And the other factor there is, just from a home purchase, sell standpoint, you usually look at it from a standpoint of transfer tax and recordation fee. So if you combine those two, we felt like we had some wiggle room there because
Yeah.
the combined rate of those two would still be in line with other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I looked at that. But we also, I think, are far below on some of the impact side of it, too.
I mean, the bottom line for us is we're just a bunch
And
of,
I think our ability to provide some leadership and some good open communication would be of value to the county. And then it'll be time for me to retire. So, any questions or any general comments from the committee on areas that you'd like to see us deal with? We've got your calendar, and we're going to keep pretty closely to that. Please make